A woman who couldn't have children suddenly gives birth overnight. No pregnancy. No medical explanation. A pastor claims he has the power to make barren women mothers through prayer alone. But what if these miracle babies weren't from God, but stolen? At first, people believed it was a divine blessing. Women who were told they could never conceive, suddenly cradling newborns in their arms. Was this a miracle? Or something far more sinister? But then, the truth started to unravel. DNA tests exposed a shocking secret. These weren't miracle babies. They weren't even theirs. So, was this the work of God? Or the biggest religious scam in history? Before the scandal, before the investigations, before the shocking DNA tests, Gilbert Deya was just another preacher. Born in Kenya, he would rise from humble beginnings to become a self-proclaimed bishop with thousands of devoted followers. His message? That faith alone could perform miracles. That barren women could conceive. That impossibilities didn't exist in his world. Deya's charisma was undeniable. In the 1990s, he moved to the UK, where he quickly built a following. His sermons were fiery. His promises were bold. He wasn't just a preacher, he was a showman. And his message was exactly what desperate believers wanted to hear. Women who had suffered for years, who had spent everything on doctors, who had given up hope, he told them they could conceive. And they believed him. At first, it all seemed like divine intervention. But then, questions started to emerge. How were women who had never been pregnant suddenly holding newborns? Why were there no medical records of these pregnancies? And why was the man of God so secretive? The UK authorities had already started to take notice. Complaints of financial fraud were piling up. Money was pouring into Deya's ministry, but where was it going? But the biggest red flag? The babies. One by one, infertile women were returning home with newborns. Deya and his followers insisted that these were miracle babies, gifts from heaven. But doctors had a different theory. When some of these women were examined, they showed no signs of recent pregnancy. No stretch marks. No labor trauma. Nothing. The evidence wasn't adding up. But still, thousands continued to believe. As the whispers of fraud turned into full-blown accusations, Deya's followers split into two camps. Some defended him, claiming these babies were proof of his divine power. Others started to doubt. Could it all be real? Or was something far more sinister happening behind the scenes? One thing was certain, the world was about to find out. It started with whispers, then spread like wildfire. Women who had struggled with infertility for years suddenly had babies in their arms. They swore they had conceived, without medical intervention. No doctors, no treatments, just faith, prayer, and the blessings of Bishop Gilbert Deya. One woman, overcome with emotion, testified before a packed congregation. She had tried everything, fertility treatments, herbal remedies, even consulting multiple specialists. Nothing had worked. But then, she met Deya. After just a few months of attending his prayer services, she fell pregnant. And soon after, a baby was placed in her arms. Soon, others came forward with nearly identical stories. A woman who had been childless for 20 years suddenly gave birth, without any physical signs of pregnancy. Another, told by doctors she would never conceive, held a miracle baby just months after meeting Deya. Testimonies poured in. The media took notice. His followers believed they had witnessed the work of God. And Dea? He basked in the attention. His ministry grew. Donations flowed in. More women flocked to him, desperate for their own miracle. But something wasn't right. As journalists and medical professionals dug deeper, disturbing inconsistencies emerged. Many of these women had no medical records of pregnancy. No ultrasounds. No doctor visits. In fact, some had undergone medical exams, and showed no physical signs of having ever carried a child. And yet, they held babies in their arms. Some of these so-called mothers did appear pregnant, but their pregnancies were unusual. Bellies that seemed to swell overnight, only to give birth weeks later. Some women claimed to feel movements inside them, but doctors found nothing on scans. And then, the strangest detail of all, some of these miracle babies looked older. Not like newborns. Not fragile or premature. But alert, well-developed, and in some cases, already a few months old at birth. If these women weren't truly pregnant, where were these babies coming from? Authorities started asking the same thing. Hospitals had no records of their births. No labor and delivery records. No admissions. Nothing. Yet, the babies existed. They had names, birth certificates signed by church officials, but no official documentation from any medical institution. Something didn't add up. Despite the growing suspicions, many of Dea's followers refused to believe he could be lying. To them, the absence of medical proof was part of the miracle. Science cannot explain the power of God, they argued. Faith does not need evidence. But for investigators, this wasn't about faith. It was about something far more sinister. And the deeper they dug, the darker the truth became. Women who were never pregnant, holding babies that seemed older than newborns, hospitals with no records, and a preacher at the center of it all. Was this divine intervention? Or the makings of one of the biggest religious scams in history? And more importantly, if these babies weren't miracles, where did they come from? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe in miracle babies, or do you think something sinister was happening? Let us know. And don't forget to subscribe. At first, the cases seemed unrelated. A hospital in Nairobi recorded a newborn missing from the maternity ward. The staff was baffled. There was no sign of a break-in, no forced entry. Just an empty crib. Then, another report. A baby, only a few hours old, disappeared without a trace. And then, the reports kept coming. A wave of newborns vanishing from hospitals across Kenya. Each time, the circumstances were eerily similar. Mothers woke up after childbirth, only to find their babies gone. At first, authorities dismissed the cases as isolated incidents. But when one doctor noticed something chilling, several of these missing newborns were later spotted in Gilbert Dea's congregation, being hailed as miracle babies. The alarm bells rang. While the authorities hesitated, investigative journalists sensed a story far bigger than anyone imagined. They went undercover, posing as followers, attending Dea's services, and speaking to the women who claimed to have received miracle babies. What they found was disturbing. Many of these women, despite their claims of pregnancy, had never been seen visiting a doctor. No prenatal checkups. No ultrasounds. No medical proof of pregnancy, just testimonies of faith and prayer. And then, something even stranger, some of these miracle babies looked strikingly similar to the infants who had gone missing from hospitals. With growing media attention, the Kenyan police launched their own investigation. They began following the women who claimed to have received these miracle babies. Were they actually pregnant? Were they secretly visiting hospitals? The truth was far more shocking. Surveillance teams tracked multiple women for months. They never showed signs of pregnancy. No swelling bellies. No medical visits. And yet, suddenly, they were holding newborns. But if they weren't carrying these babies, where were the infants coming from? It wasn't just speculation anymore, authorities needed proof. A DNA investigation was launched. Dozens of women who had received miracle babies were tested alongside their children. The results? Devastating. None of the babies were biologically related to the women claiming to be their mothers. Not a single one. Forensic experts and child welfare officials were horrified. These babies had not come from divine intervention, they had been taken. Stolen. Trafficked. The miracle was a lie. With undeniable proof in hand, Kenyan authorities moved quickly. A series of raids were planned, targeting locations suspected of housing stolen infants. One by one, these safe houses were uncovered, hidden in plain sight. Inside? Dozens of babies. Some crying. Some eerily silent. Malnourished, wrapped in tattered blankets, with no records, no names, no past. It was a child trafficking operation hiding under the veil of religious miracles. As news of the raid spread, panic gripped Dea's followers. Some refused to believe the allegations. They accused the media of attacking a man of God. Others, however, started questioning everything they had believed in. How could their beloved pastor, who had promised them divine blessings, be involved in such a horrifying scandal? Dea, however, remained defiant. He called the accusations spiritual warfare, claiming he was being persecuted for his faith. But behind closed doors, he was running out of time. With the police closing in and undeniable proof mounting against him, Gilbert Dea faced his greatest test yet. Would he finally confess? Or would he continue to convince his followers that this was all part of a divine plan? And more importantly, how many more stolen babies were still out there? Do you think Dea was a mastermind, or a misguided man who truly believed in miracles? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. As the walls began closing in, Gilbert Dea did what many criminals do, he ran. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a potential arrest in Kenya, Dea fled the country. His destination? The United Kingdom. There, he sought refuge, painting himself not as a fugitive, but as a man of God under attack. To his followers, he spun a new narrative. He wasn't escaping justice, he was escaping persecution. But behind closed doors, he was living a life far from a man seeking redemption. His church in London continued operating, and his congregation still sent him money, believing in his innocence. Authorities in Kenya sent out an international alert, but Dea was careful. He kept a low profile, using his church as a shield. He continued preaching, convincing his followers that this was all a test of faith. And many believed him. But soon, whispers of his past reached the UK authorities. Scotland Yard began receiving complaints, allegations of financial fraud, fake miracle healings, and the darkest accusation of all, child trafficking. Was Dea still orchestrating illegal adoptions from London? Had the miracle baby operation extended beyond Kenya? Investigators wanted answers. For years, the UK struggled to bring Dea to justice. Kenyan authorities demanded his extradition, but Dea fought back. He claimed he was innocent, that he was being persecuted for his faith. He even sought asylum in the UK, arguing that returning to Kenya would mean certain death. His legal team used every trick in the book, stalling, filing appeals, and dragging out the case for over a decade. Meanwhile, the families of the missing babies waited, hoping justice would come. But no amount of legal maneuvering could keep the truth buried forever. By 2017, after years of investigations, legal battles, and mounting international pressure, the UK government made its move. Gilbert Deya's asylum request was denied. The British authorities handed him over to Kenyan officials. As soon as he landed in Nairobi, he was immediately taken into custody. His years of running had come to an end. Back in Kenya, Deya was charged with multiple counts of child trafficking. His once loyal followers were now divided, some still believed in his innocence, while others began to question everything. During the trial, shocking details emerged. Witnesses testified how Deya's network operated, smuggling babies from hospitals, forging birth documents, and deceiving desperate women into believing they had experienced divine miracles. The prosecution presented undeniable DNA evidence, proving that the miracle babies were not related to the women who claimed them as their own. One by one, the lies unraveled. News of Deya's trial sent shockwaves across Kenya and beyond. TV stations aired the courtroom proceedings, and social media erupted with heated debates. Was he a criminal mastermind, or a deluded preacher who truly believed in miracles? Some of his followers still defended him, convinced he was being framed. Others, however, were disgusted, angry that they had been deceived for so long. As the trial dragged on, one question remained: would Gilbert Deya finally be held accountable for the lives he had destroyed? After years of deception, Gilbert Deya was now facing the full force of the law. But would justice truly be served? His trial was just beginning, and his defense team had a shocking strategy up their sleeve, one that could change everything. Do you think Deya was a fraud, or was he truly convinced he had divine powers? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, legal experts, and desperate families waited for justice. But outside, a different battle was brewing. A battle of belief versus reason. A battle that would divide people forever. As the trial unfolded, some still believed in Gilbert Deya's innocence. In their eyes, this wasn't a man on trial for child trafficking, it was a prophet being persecuted for his faith. "He is a man of God," one woman sobbed outside the courtroom. "I don't care what the doctors say. I know what I experienced. I carried that baby. I felt him grow inside me. I gave birth. That's the truth." But then, there was the other side. The skeptics. The victims. The ones who had lost everything. The most loyal of Deya's followers refused to accept the truth. To them, the DNA tests were irrelevant. The hospital reports were lies. This was the work of the devil, trying to discredit a true man of faith. One by one, women came forward, swearing on their lives that they had given birth to their miracle babies. "I never went to a doctor," one woman confessed. "Why should I? God gave me my child, not science." In their eyes, Deya wasn't just a preacher. He was a modern-day Moses, performing wonders that science could never understand. But not everyone was convinced. And not everyone was blind to the facts. The skeptics had their own version of events, backed by cold, hard truth. "This was never about miracles," said a former church member. "This was a business. A very, very dark business. To them, Dea had never been a prophet. He was a manipulator. A master con artist who knew exactly what desperate women wanted to hear. Some even accused him of running his church like a cult, controlling members, forcing them to give money, and punishing those who questioned him. He told us that doubting him was the same as doubting God, another former follower revealed. And if we doubted, we would be cursed. The more investigators dug, the more disturbing details they uncovered. Dea's church wasn't just a place of worship. It was a place of control. Former members described being brainwashed, cut off from their families, forced to devote their lives, and their money, to the church. And the most chilling claim of all? That some women had been so convinced they were pregnant, their bodies even started showing symptoms. It's a rare condition called pseudocyesis, or false pregnancy. Extreme belief and psychological manipulation can trick the body into mimicking pregnancy. A growing belly, morning sickness, even labor pains. Had these women truly been carrying miracle babies? Or had their minds been controlled so deeply that their own bodies betrayed them? While the debate raged on, the truth remained unchanged. The miracle babies were not miracles at all. They were stolen. Hospital records proved that newborns had vanished from maternity wards. Nurses testified about suspicious strangers lurking near labor rooms. Desperate mothers had their babies taken, only for them to reappear in Dea's church. DNA tests didn't just disprove the miracle, they exposed the crime. And yet, even as these facts came to light, Dea's supporters still refused to believe it. As the trial dragged on, the world remained divided. To some, he was a false prophet who had orchestrated one of the most disturbing religious scams in history. To others, he was an innocent man, a servant of God, punished for performing miracles that science couldn't explain. The conversations weren't just happening in courtrooms anymore. They were happening in homes, churches, and online forums. People argued, debated, and questioned everything they thought they knew. Was Gilbert Dea a fraud? A genius manipulator? Or was there still the slightest chance that he was telling the truth? And so, we leave you with this question. Was Gilbert Dea a misunderstood prophet, a victim of religious persecution? Or was he one of the biggest religious criminals of our time? What do you believe? Let us know in the comments below. Is he a man of God, or a criminal mastermind? Comment your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe. After years of legal battles, courtroom drama, and worldwide controversy, the moment of truth had arrived. The judge stood before a packed courtroom. The air was thick with tension. And then, the verdict was read. Gilbert Dea was found guilty of child trafficking. For many, this was justice. A criminal had finally been exposed. But for others, it was a grave mistake. An attack on religion. A sign that true men of God were being silenced. He was sentenced to serve time in a Kenyan prison, but his story wasn't over yet. So what happened to Gilbert Dea after the verdict? Did he disappear into the shadows of a prison cell, forgotten by the world? Not exactly. Despite his conviction, Dea continued to claim innocence. Even behind bars, he preached to fellow inmates, insisting that he had been framed by corrupt officials and faithless doctors who couldn't comprehend the power of God. Shockingly, even after his release, some of his followers still stood by him. His church, though tarnished, wasn't completely destroyed. In some circles, his name still carries weight. Some even whisper, that he could make a return. Now, here's the chilling question that no one wants to think about, but we need to ask it anyway. If Gilbert Dea could convince hundreds of people that he could create miracle babies, could someone else do the same? History shows us that religious scams, cult-like followings, and manipulative leaders don't just disappear. They evolve. They find new victims. They learn from the past and perfect their tactics. And perhaps the most terrifying part? Right now, somewhere in the world, another so-called prophet could be setting the stage for the next shocking deception. Will we recognize it before it's too late? Or will history repeat itself? Now, it's your turn to decide. Was Gilbert Dea a fraud, or was he unfairly targeted? Some say he was a mastermind who preyed on desperate women, stealing babies, and calling it a miracle. Others believe he was a man of faith, wrongly convicted for performing God's work. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's settle this debate once and for all. If you found this story shocking, trust me, this is just the beginning. We uncover the darkest, most controversial true crime cases that no one else dares to cover. So hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we're exposing next. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like this video. It helps us bring you more insane true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and always question everything.